What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Sec Tech Podcast. It is so good to be here with you today. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, co-host Kenn Williamson. Kenn, I think we are on Hero haircut number 6 over here.
Yeah.
You got gel in it today?
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. I last few days I really didn't do anything with it, and I was looking crazy, like mad scientist. You didn't see me, but a couple people noticed it was like everywhere. And then this morning I woke up, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be on camera. I should probably do something about that, and shaved and everything.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. You do have that clean shave look, and
yep.
Yeah, you're starting to show me up on these, man. I need to get a stylist or something just to keep up with all your looks, man.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know that my looks are all that interesting, but maybe comment if you've noticed how many different looks. We'll expect comments with the number of looks thus far.
Please do. Yeah. I've got to decide pretty quickly. I'm in a fantasy football league.
Oh yeah.
And I won. So naturally I'm talking a lot of crap.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. Like just a lot in the group chat. And the idea this year is for the loser, they have to shave a star into their head.
I like that.
And leave it if you lose. And so there could be a chance come, end of football season. I might, well, hopefully I don't lose. I mean, I'd like to repeat, but yeah. So I pictured a big star in my head. Like,
as soon as you said that, that's exactly what I was thinking, was just like right in the middle of the top. That would be so great.
Oh man. But man, I'm so excited for our conversation today. We've been in the product ownership, the software world for a while. Today, we're actually going to dive into more UX and a lot more, UX is, I think, kind of an underrated aspect of the digital transformation project.
So much. And, I think this might be our first, serious UX developer that we've had. Like, we've had a couple of back-end people, a couple of AI people, lots of business people, and some full stack guys that can do UX, UI stuff, but no one that really specializes in it. And so I think this is going to be great. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you and I, we've done full stack work.
Yeah.
We're by no means UX people. As a matter of fact, we would much rather deal with the data than build a button.
I'm sure our guest would look at my designs and be like, what's wrong with it?
Exactly. We should show her Nova Mud and just how bad we did.
Let's not. Let's just not.
But yeah, so I'm so excited. Elena Haskins, she's been doing this for several years now.
Yep.
She owns a company, Anele, which is actually just her name backwards.
I know, and now we spoiled
cool.
You spoiled the Easter egg for everybody.
I did. Oh man, but
fired.
I probably should have been fired.
Man.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk with her. This is something that you and I could definitely glean some wisdom from, and I think our viewers will as well. So it's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, and one of the things that she's really interested in that is kind of new to me is this idea of OOUX, object-oriented UX. And
can't wait
it
for
sounds really interesting to me. I had kind of seen the term floating around a little bit on LinkedIn and whatnot, tech blogs, but I didn't know anything about it. And then I learned a little bit just to prepare. And so anyway, I'm really excited. We should bring her on.
Yes, let's do that. We will be right back with Elena Haskins. Well, welcome back, everybody. We're here with our guest, Elena. Elena, how you doing today?
I am doing swell.
Good. It is so good to have you here. We're excited to learn from you. We're developers. We've done product ownership. We've done the whole gamut of digital transformation. I feel that UX is one of the areas that you specialize in, and a lot of people underrate when it comes to the digital transformation project. As a matter of fact, a lot of what we talk about are the bottlenecks in, when you're building a big feature or an application. And I feel like there could be a lot of bottlenecks even just in the UX side because people don't think about it enough. So you're more in the object-oriented UX space. That's kind of a newer term. Tell us what that means.
So object-oriented UX in a nutshell is thinking about what are the different components or, entities that are living in your system and how do they relate.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I can say it in like regular people language is I want you to think about walking into a coffee shop and you can't tell the difference between the chairs, the coffee tables, and the cups.
Interesting.
And you're like, I know what a coffee shop is supposed to be like,
Yeah.
but I can't figure out how they're connected, what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the coffee cup that goes with this table? What's the status of this chair? Is it empty? Can I sit in it? Now, when I say that for a physical setting, that's really weird.
Yeah.
But we do that, we make that mistake when we create digital systems all the time,
Mm-hmm.
where someone comes in and they're like, wait, what is this? What
Mm-hmm.
can I do with it? How is this related? What is the status of the information associated with it that I need to know in order to do something?
Yeah.
So what object-oriented UX does is we break apart those pieces. So similar to object-oriented programming, which I'm sure you're familiar with, we take that from more of a we take that fundamental and we put it towards a design aspect where we say, what are the objects? Maybe it's we have like a user, a post, a comment. What are the different data points that are associated with it? So that's bringing in the information that's important to the backend users, the backend devs, but thinking about it for design, because we have to make sure that it's on the UI screen. It's not just devs, you just, take the data and go do something with it, which is usually what happens. And now we're fumbling later on being like, let's just put it in some weird order.
Right.
And the user's like, what is this? How can I find this information? So if we plan this all together in the beginning, before we even hit any screens, before we even start developing, it can make a lot more sense when we start thinking about the relationships. What does this have to do to this, to this, to this? So we are less bottlenecking because we're not thinking about only A to B, B to C, C to D, but it's A to B, A to C, A to D. And then everything is actually connecting a lot more fluidly. And then you have a better user experience, and everyone who's working on it is like, oh, okay, we actually are collaborating, and we're not actually just using the word collaborating and not doing it.
Yeah. So, I like the coffee shop analogy, right? Because if you walked into a coffee shop and you saw all of the chairs piled up in one corner of the room, not around, and then tables piled up in another corner of the room, you would say, this is not, maybe not even this is a coffee shop. This is like a warehouse or something, right? And so it is that like, table needs to be here, chairs need to be around it, coffee cups go on top of tables, right? This kind of stuff. So I think that's such a great way of looking at it. And I think we want to delve more deeply into that. But before we do that, since you are our first UX type person to really come on, let's back up a little bit and just talk a little bit about UI, UX. What is the difference between UI and UX, and what does a UX designer really do, separate from the idea of let's kind of paradigm shift into object oriented?
For sure. So UX stands for user experience. Some people might not actually know that because we always are just like UX, UI.
Yeah. Honestly, what's so funny is you were walking in the room and I literally whispered to Ken, I was like, UX is the experience, right?
Really?
He's like, yeah.
Quickly like ChatGPT, what is UX?
I was like, which one's which? Yeah, I do it all the time.
Yeah. So user experience, basically, how can we make something easy to use? How do we make it intuitive? So when someone looks at it, we don't need to hold your hand. We're not going to be there when the users are, clonking through what we made. So they need to be able to figure it out without any help.
Yeah.
And UI stands for user interface. Does it look nice? Does it look clear? Does it look like I know what to do? And I don't have to keep Googling, what do I click to get from here to there? And we've all been there, and it's such a headache.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good point. And you mentioned intuitive. So do you want to talk a little bit about the difference between a good UX and a bad UX? And I think that word intuitive is really pretty key to the difference between the user experiences.
Yeah. When I think about intuitiveness, when someone jumps onto a screen, do they know what to do? That's like the baseline. So a lot of UX revolves around users, like talking to the people. So user research, connecting to people and actually asking them direct questions, not just saying, hey, do you like this idea? Or what do you think about this? But tell me about your day-to-day currently.
Yeah.
So you can figure out what are the things they actually need to do instead of some random stakeholder who's like, I think I know best. I'm like, yes, but what do they actually need? And they're the ones giving us the money. So from a business perspective, you also need to be thinking about that. from a dev perspective, you don't want to be building all this stuff that no one even wants.
Right.
So let's talk to them. Let's figure out what they need. And then from there, we take that information, we start building and mapping things for what makes actual sense. So they can go, oh, I need to go check out, or I need to go sign up for something. So they can look on a screen and instantly know this is where I need to be.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's amazing. I think so often in the dev process, at least for developers specifically, and I think teams, we get so if you're like a product owner, you're so 40,000 feet in the air looking at the entire project, where we're at, where we're going, what are the requirements, all that, right?
Yeah.
If you're a developer, typically you're first trying, you're a lot of developers going to wade into the data, right? What data needs to come up on the screen. And then what tends to happen is like, okay, we know where we're going, we got the data, now just put the data on the screen, right? Is typically how it goes. Like, yeah, all right, here's a radio box, right? Or here's a little input box for your data, right? In your experience as you work, do you think that the UI UX process should be developed alongside obviously the data, but before data is there, or do you think it should be data first or UI UX first?
I think they can go in tandem. So obviously you do want to do some semblance of UX before you start building all the screens. But when it comes to a data perspective, you do want to be doing that back end at the same time, because then you can start surfacing those questions of saying, hey, these are like 15 things we need to know about this product or this user. And then the designer's like, oh, that's a good thing to know. And so you are bouncing back and forth, which is also why I do more of the object-oriented UX thing, which, to be clear, it's not replacing UX. It's like an extra spice. It's like extra thing I add to my process to make sure that we are really thinking about how are the developers thinking about this so we can make the database at the same time. So I think they do work together. Sometimes people don't. Like, that's a very ideal world.
Yeah.
And that's not always what happens. But I'm always pushing for that, where I'm like, okay, you can keep working on that, and then we can go back and forth.
No, that's great. You also mentioned, as you know, in our pre-meeting, that you love like those light bulb moments, right? Where somebody gets on and it's like, oh, they really thought of everything. That to me is like the pinnacle of what you want out of UI UX, right? It's like when somebody can log on and go, man, they thought of literally everything I need, you know?
I went through a user test. So one of my clients it's like for pipeline integrity. And so we make sure the pipelines are healthy so they don't spill and all that. Very important. And the guy, he looked at it and he was just like, wow, dang, you're like in my head. And that was just like the coolest moment, because he would rattle off something. I'm like, oh, this? And he's like, yes. Oh my gosh. And then as he's going through it, which a big part of user testing is you need to give your actual product to a real person, let them click through with it, watch them in their natural, well, maybe not their natural habitat. I'm not in the oil fields with them, but I'm watching them in real time look at it for the first time. And so I ask them to talk out loud. And as he's going, he's like, oh, it would be really nice. Oh, you have it. Oh, okay. And he's clicking through. He's like, well, what if oh, there it is. I'm like, okay. And I'm just kind of like sitting back and watching him do this. And it is the coolest moment.
That's awesome.
No, and I think that is, like Matt was saying earlier, kind of overlooked. And I'm, pointing at myself. I'm pretty guilty of this. I'm like, is all the data that you need on the screen, are all the actions you need to take on the screen? Okay, then the app is functional and you can use it, right? But I think that really what we're, and I think that this is becoming more and more important, because we have so many, I'm sure you have clients like this too, where there is a old clunky, maybe desktop or like we were just looking at a Visual Basic app that was written like with WinForms and it just is like, like that old style of just really everything really clumped together and exactly. And I'm sure you're also dealing with this of trying to update that, but not just port it into the web or do whatever, but really create that intuitive workflow so that I love what you had said about the pipeline integrity thing, where he's looking for the information and then it's becomes obvious to him where that is, because that to me is one of the biggest killers of the UX. Is the information is here, but I don't know where to look to get to it, right? So why don't you talk a little bit about your process? You know, you mentioned the OOUX, and so if you want to talk a little bit about the general UX process that you use, and then that secret spice that you're adding now, how do you go about learning this and making that aha moment for a client?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different phases of the UX process. So I'll do kind of like the high level and how it applies to devs, because I work a lot of times with companies where I'm the first designer. It's been strictly a dev centered product.
Yeah.
And it exists. It's exactly what you said. The stuff is there. It's there. You can technically click through it, and it's nothing.
You can hurt our feelings. It's okay.
Fine.
Yeah, you don't need to save our.
And then it gets to the point where they're like, okay, we should bring someone in. And so I usually am cleanup crew. I'm like the janitor that makes things look clean. Everyone goes, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
so
that's a good way of looking at it.
So I'll use this one example of this client that I've been working with. It's a manufacturing company, and so we were creating an internal tool for their proposals. And so they have this huge legacy system that they've been using for years, and everyone's just kind of used to it. They have a lot of complaints, but they're just like, I know where it is because I've been doing it for 10 years, but it's not the best. So the first step for something like that, and you could do this for a product that doesn't exist too, but I'll use this as an example because I work directly with devs, is you talk to the people and you just understand. You don't say, what do you want? You want to know what their problem is.
Yeah.
Say, walk me through your day when you're trying to create a proposal. What kind of things are you trying to get done? Where are your headaches? What kind of frustrations do you have? Where are you getting the most confused? And then you can kind of dive into, in the perfect world, what would that look like? And you're not having them build the tool in their head, because then if you ask someone what you want in the house, they're going to say, oh, I want like a 4-story house, a jacuzzi and a bathtub and all these things.
Yeah.
And so you say, what's missing in your house?
Right. I like that question. What's
yeah.
missing?
Yeah. So like, what is making it harder for you? And you're like, well, my dryer and my washer, the doors hit each other. And you're like, okay, cool. But if you don't ask questions in that kind of way, people are gonna be like, oh, I guess it could add a pool. And you're like, well, we're not doing that. We're not building a pool right now. So you have to have some kind of centered approach when you do it, where you don't just say, tell me, but you also don't want to be leading them. Say, hey, what do you think about this? So there's like an art to that about when you're asking that kind of questions.
Yeah.
So it's really just understanding what's the challenge. And so then if it's something that doesn't exist, you just ask them about what they're currently doing.
Yeah.
They're doing something.
Right.
Maybe they're using a different tool, or they're doing some weird DIY thing in a notebook to the computer. And it's a whole headache.
Yeah.
You want to know about those, even if it's something like really silly where they're like, I just put this in sticky note. And I'm like, dude, tell me about those sticky notes. What do you do with them? They're like, well, I never read them. And I'm like, okay, good to know. Why don't you read them? So those are like the little Easter eggs you can start pulling.
Yeah.
You say, okay, got it. I know what your problems are.
Right.
Essentially. And then what you would typically do is you can start mapping out who are the people. So your users, what are their needs? And then what are those requirements for those screens? So that's where I use object-oriented UX. Traditionally, I might just jump into flows and I might say, you're trying to do this, what are the different steps you need to take? What are you currently doing? And then where are the issues? And then from there, I can kind of use that as a checklist for the screens. With OOUX, what I do is I'll identify the objects, and then we have the attributes, so the data points. So what are all the different pieces of information you're going to need in your database for each one? Then I map out the relationships. And this is where it gets really exhaustive in a good way.
Yeah.
And then last, we think of the call to actions.
Right.
So what are all the actions that users are going to need to do for these objects? So I'm planning all these things I'm going to do anyways, but in more of a like listy brainstormy way. And it's just easier. It feels a little bit more organized.
So really what you're doing is you're saying, okay, we walked in the coffee shop. There's, 7 tables and, we have 35 chairs. What you're doing is going, okay, now that I know what we have, let's
Mhm.
arrange this and put this in a way that's
Mhm.
going to work for the next person that's going to walk into the coffee shop.
Exactly. So instead of saying, I'm going to compare traditional to real, traditional to with you OOUX, because it really does tie into the process.
Mhm.
So traditionally you'd say, okay, you just hired me to clean up this coffee shop. Okay, I got to think about what is someone ordering? Okay, the order flow. One person does that. Now you have another person do, what does cleanup look like? Okay, great. What does marketing, the muffin, for buying
Yeah.
a muffin look like? So you have those completely separate things. But if you start with an object-oriented method, you're like, okay, let's start with the muffin.
Yeah.
Okay, what are all the attributes of the muffin? The cost,
Yeah.
the ingredients. So then that ties into maybe you might need to put on the menu that's gluten-free, or what the price is. Maybe there's a special. Or what if we're out of stock? The kitchen needs to tell the people in the front it's out of stock, so take it off the menu. So that's where that relationship is,
Mm,
where the people who are doing this are going to need to know how to communicate to these people.
right.
So what's the relationship between the muffin to the customer, to the barista, to the table, to the plate? Every muffin needs to go on a plate. 2 plates? No, 1 plate. Whose plate? The plate for the customer. You know, all these like really tiny relationships that we take for granted, people don't write out because they're like, well, we just assume the muffin goes on the plate. Like, what if we're out of plates?
Mm,
What if, yeah, I don't
Can
know.
you have a muffin in a box or
Yeah,
a
we allow, yeah,
muffin
what if they
on
have to
a,
go?
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
And
I love
and it's
that.
like all these small details, but like if we don't think about them in more of a exhaustive way, we're gonna run into something where we're like, yeah, this, and then we just kind of put something together. But if we keep doing that, things are gonna start breaking because we're getting away
Yeah.
from an actual system. So I think of it as requirements on steroids.
Yeah.
Mm,
Like, so it's not, you don't have to do it. We've been going many years without doing this, but now that I heard it, I can't go back because I'm like, this is great. And you can talk with the developers and they're like, okay, yeah, this is how I can start structuring the database. So back to your original question about the process. So once I have all that information, I'm like, okay, cool. Let's actually start building out what those screens are.
yeah.
So we do it in wireframe. So that's without any of the UI. It's ugly, some rectangles and some text, but that's really important because we don't want to focus on that.
Yeah.
A lot of times people are like, oh, it's a really ugly color. I'm like, we're not talking about that. Don't look at that. And people get really distracted.
Sure.
But we want to talk about functionality. Does it work?
Yeah.
Like, it can be the most beautiful thing ever, but if it doesn't work, you lost a customer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no one's going to stay because it looks really nice. Or like a user isn't going to be like, wow, I just loved how you put that radio button next to that checkbox. That's so good. Like, they're going to be like, wow, you just ruined my day because I can't even buy this ticket. And it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
So you do the wireframes, you map out those flows using that. You put that in front of people, real people, not just your buddy,
Yeah.
not just your boss, real people who ideally would be your target audience customers. Get their feedback, rinse and repeat, and then you can start applying the visuals. Now we can start adding in the design system that we have. Ideally, you have a design system,
Yeah.
something for standardization. We're like colors, fonts, cool buttons. Now we can do that. And alongside, I'm talking to dev the whole time saying, look at this. Does this work? Not that I make something and now developers are like, yeah, if we had 3 years, we could do that. And I'm like, well, I just promised this to all these people. And so now you're like, wow, we have a lot of tech debt and it's a whole problem.
Yeah.
So that's like the typical UX process. And then I just mentioned what OOUX would look like in that.
Yeah, such a great answer. And I love this way of thinking about it, because usually when you talk about object oriented, it's in relationship to the other paradigm, which is functional paradigm,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And it really does seem like for most of thus far, the functional paradigm is how UX was designed, right?
Mhm.
I have a process. I want to take an order. I want to go and get the muffin out of the
Mhm.
out of the case, and then I want to bring it to a customer on a plate, and then the
Mhm.
customer's going to take it to their table, and then
Mhm.
somebody's going to come and bust the table, and it's all this very like process flow oriented, right? And now you're kind of shifting that focus to say, well, let's start with, there's a muffin. It can be in a case. It can be on a plate. It can
Mhm.
be in a bag. It can, it can
Mhm.
be our muffin. It can be the customer's muffin, right? All of
Mhm.
this, like changing it to, rather than we have this long flow chart, we have objects, and then objects that can interact with each other
Mhm.
and can do stuff, right? And gosh, it's just such such an and obviously there's still a functional aspect to
Of
it where you
course.
have a process, right?
Yeah.
But it's starting with
Mhm.
the data points and then moving into the process rather than starting with the process and then moving into the
Yeah.
data, right?
Exactly.
So
Like,
cool.
because it's not getting rid of flows. Like any UX designer who's listening, don't worry, we're not going to get rid of your flows.
Yeah.
We're just going to make your flows a little bit better.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel as dead end,
Right.
where now your flow is just broken because one part of this other flow is broken. But let's anticipate that. Let's think about the use cases before we even get to that point where things start breaking.
I love that. Now, you hit on something a minute ago that I wanted to circle back on, which is that you can deliver sometimes the like best, most functional looking UI UX. The data's there, everything, and yet all people can focus on is like, is that the right color red for, you know what I mean? Or like,
Mhm.
oh man, is that like, what font do we, and they can get so lost in minutia. We've all been there, right?
Mhm.
Where it's like, I present like this great feature and like all the customers like, is that our blue? You know,
Mhm.
how do you, you know, what soft skills are required and how do you move through those kind of conversations? Because I know that they can be very tedious for a lot of developers and designers.
The first is you always have to set expectation. Like when you are presenting something, and this isn't just when you're doing user testing, even if I'm talking to my own team, I'm showing anything, I'm telling you the goal of the conversation. So I'll
Yeah.
say, hey, I would love to show you this and I want to make sure it works well. And acknowledge you're like, hey, maybe it doesn't look great. We're working on that. But I really want to make sure that you know how to get through it. So just I set that baseline just to
Mm.
like pop it in their head. And then usually people will make a comment later on the road, they'll forget. And you want to accept it with grace, and you want to validate it, and then you kind of like move on by. You're
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm like, so walk me through how you would create a new note. And then they might say, okay, I would, oh, well, this is really big. This headline is really big, and the blue is like kind of ugly. I'm like, okay, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for letting me know. We're still working on that. So I would love to hear how you would create a note, and then just kind of like push them along. And that usually does the trick. And just soft voice, like, okay, yeah, great.
So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
And so some of our listeners are more business people than
Mhm.
developers, and so I want to kind of put you on the spot and say, what are some of the most difficult things that business people will do to make your job difficult, and what can they do differently so that you have a better experience
Mhm.
and they end up with a better experience and product?
Research is usually the first to go. Like I've worked on so many products where I'm like, oh, do you have any research we can share, or can I access any of your users? And they're like, we just don't have time or money. And that is that is going to cause a huge hole in your wallet if you skip that. Even though you think you're saving money, you could be spending hours and hours of people's time and money making something that no one wants.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And who wants to have a business where you're producing something that doesn't work, that doesn't actually solve a problem, and doesn't take anyone's concerns to hand? And that will
Right.
show. Like people are going to use it. You're not going to have like a good retention rate. People are going to leave. You're going to get bad reviews. Like just look through any of the app store things. People are like, I tried to do this and it doesn't work, or it's like super confusing. You don't want the word confusing associated with your product,
Right.
especially if it's a consumer facing one. That's going to get out. Why do you think there's so many competitors that are doing kind of the same thing? Because they found that one thing that everyone's complaining about, and then they don't do it.
Yeah.
And so then that's what skyrockets you. So what a business owner can do is you don't have to be shelling out hundreds of $1,000s. Even just having a little bit of time and set aside a few $1,000s where you can compensate the user, because you always want to compensate them, because one, if you do it for free, you're going to get like no one's going to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't owe you, you're a business. Like they're like, please give us your feedback. They're like, oh, here's a gift card you might win in a raffle. No, just like compensate them even a small amount, be respectful of their time, let them know what it's for, and then but just definitely having that as a priority for decisions. And it's like you don't have to be doing it every single time. I
Mhm.
think when people think about research, they're like, oh my gosh, it's this like huge many months long commitment. I'm like, no, it could be as easy as me taking 3 hours to talk to people for 30 minutes and just saying, hey, walk through this. And then you end up catching like 50 things. like, I can't imagine shipping this. I'd be so embarrassed shipping this, knowing that these are all the problems that someone's going to find.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, I mean, the customer facing thing is pretty obvious, but I think even internal tools, I'm sure it's very similar. You know, when you do need to compensate your employees and explain to them, why is this important? Say, you know, sit down with Elena, walk through your process, you know, and then we'll end up with a better product at the end. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I do too. And I really feel like having that type of mentality I think that it not only can build trust but saves the time, like you said, right? Because now we don't have to ship and go let customers figure out these 50 things. Now we have 50 support tickets, and now when we could be working on version 2 or whatever we had planned for this release, post release, we've got to fix the release, right? Because the release wasn't right, let alone, like, we can't move on, right?
We're constantly, like, you don't want to be in reaction mode.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Like, that's not, and like everyone's like, we got to build fast, fast, fast. And I'm like, we can still build fast, but you also need, you can't skip.
Yeah, exactly. You can't skip
You
the
can
process.
do it quickly. Like, there's obviously levels of fidelity for anything you do,
right?
Depending on like your time and your budget, but like, you can't just completely skip it. And what I always hear is people are like, well, I'm in that space. Like, I'm the expert. I'm like, that is awesome. Cool. It's really good. You're only one person. And also, you're not doing that anymore. You own this business.
Yeah.
Like, a lot can change, and it's like, you're not doing that grunt work anymore.
Right.
So you can use that to try to formulate what direction we want to do. Now we need to see what are the nuances to prioritize. Because you could probably come up with 50 things to work on. We got to poop out this MVP in like 4 or 5 months. We can't do all 50 things. We can do 10. Yeah. So what are the people who have money? What do they want us to focus on?
That's great. No, I love that. And man, there was, I think, a lot of wisdom, a lot of really good thoughts there. As we're kind of wrapping up here, tell us about where people can find you, where people can see your work and get in contact with you.
Yeah, so you can follow me on LinkedIn, Elena Haskins. I don't think there might be one other, but I'll come up. UX. And I do a lot of content around OOUX, and I just started ramping up some more workshops. So if anyone is interested in that, I'm hosting one tonight. It's probably a little too late for your users, your viewers, but I want to do more workshops. So definitely follow me for those. But I'm definitely trying to work with more companies that are B2B who have software. So whether they are a SaaS centric or they have their internal tools, I love coming in and revamping. Either you're building a new tool, you're switching from legacy, or you just want to make it a little bit more intuitive for everybody or look nicer.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of people that I'm also trying to talk to. And then lastly, if you want to see examples of my work, you can go to anele.design. So ANELE.design. And I'm sure you have the notes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll put all that in the show notes. And yeah, I love that your guys' point, and this is, to me, the biggest takeaway is that you can't get out of doing the research, doing the discovery, right? It's either you do it up front and then you work on the right things, or you don't work on the right things and then find out afterward that you did it. So, man, such a pleasure to have you on. Amazing. Thank you so much.
This has been great.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We'll have you on again soon. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us again. Don't forget, hit that like, subscribe button, comment, shoot us some
on
emails.
How many looks I've had.
Yes, comment
about what we're saying that's wrong. Like,
yeah, all of the comments, please give them all to us, and make sure you go check out Elena on LinkedIn. Thank you guys so much. We'll be back in 2 weeks.
Thanks.